All right, so welcome, Danny Williams from Cesium. Excellent background, over 15 years of experience navigating the evolution of real-time 3D technology. Currently at Cesium, he's been at the forefront of digital twins, the revolution, focusing on the business development and the integration of massive geospatial data sets into immersive environments. His work helps organizations move beyond simple visualizations to achieve real-time decision support, transferring how we understand and interact with the physical world through digital replicas. Prior to joining Cesium, Danny spent a pivotal chapter of his career at Epic Games, where he witnessed firsthand the transition of game engine technology from a tool for entertainment to a foundational pillar for industry and simulation. His journey also includes significant tenures at MAK Technologies BAE Systems and Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, providing him with a unique perspective on the convergence of defense-grade simulation and cutting-edge consumer tech. As a tech-savvy leader with a background in coding, Danny offers a grounded perspective on how artificial intelligence is currently disrupting traditional workflows. In this talk, University of Central Florida, he's going to share his insights from his career journey and provide a roadmap for students preparing for the landscape of 2030, where the lines between game technology, geospatial data, and AI-driven automation will effectively disappear. Thank you again. We are so grateful for you to come and share your knowledge and wisdom and experience with us, Danny. So take it away. We'll hold questions until the end. I hope that people will just post them in the chat, and then at the end, I will read a few out for Danny. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria. It's a pleasure to be here today. Again, I'm Danny Williams. Currently working at a company called Cesium that does work in the 3D geospatial environment. I'll get into a little bit of that as we go. But I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about the impact of AI. And I'm going to, over the next hour, kind of walk through my career journey, what I've done throughout my career, and highlight some of the big shifts that I've seen in the creation of virtual worlds, and shifts that have made that process easier, things that have made completely changed workflows, and then a specific look at what the introduction of AI in the last couple of years means for building these kinds of environments, and where I think it might be going. Definitely welcome any questions folks have. We can either do that via the chat, or if people want to ask them live at the end, happy to do that. But I wanted to start with a bit of an overview of my career journey. I will admit to absolutely using AI to generate some of the images that you'll see in my presentation today. I think it has some great capabilities for things like this. But as Maria very kindly provided that overview, I started my career early at BAE Systems, a large defense company. Worked at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab for about 8 years. Worked for a small company called IP Keys, then MAK Technologies. A very interesting handful of years at Epic Games, and now at Cesium. And while my career journey has been a bit winding in terms of the types of companies I've been working for, one thing that's been central to them is the creation of 3D virtual environments. Everything from military training capabilities to digital twins for the architecture, engineering, and construction space, to a whole variety of things, to include things like building infrastructure, building bridges and roads and things like that, skyscrapers. So that's really been core to what I've done. And so going back to my early time in my career, I did a lot of hands-on work in building those environments, both from a hands-on 3D modeling perspective, but also writing software, writing code to build and customize these types of applications. And more recently in my career, over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so, I've done more sort of direct customer engagement, working with customers that are trying to utilize different types of software to build out these types of virtual environments. So really had an interesting perspective from the software development side, from the end user side, from the customers and companies buying and using this kind of technology, and the challenges they faced, and the evolution of the technology that's happened over this time span. And I'll share a little bit about just kind of the early days, my early days, using this technology, and then I want to highlight kind of across this timeline some of the major shifts that I've seen that I think have made a significant impact on what it means to create virtual environments, and the challenges that exist there, and some of the monumental shifts that have happened in the industry that have made it much easier, much faster, but also brought along with it some of the concerns that I think probably a lot of folks are having right now with the advent of AI being used. What does it mean as these big shifts happen in industries to people that are working in those industries and people that have built specialized skill sets on top of some of these technologies? What happens when these big shifts happen and that skill set or related skill sets all of a sudden potentially become obsolete? What does that mean for the industry, and are we doing the right thing? So I'll highlight what I think some of those big shifts are, and address what I think some of the positives are, but also some of the potential concerns there. So to get started, I want to take you back to what was the very early 2000s. I started my career in 2001. I technically started working in sort of the 3D virtual environment space closer to 2004, 2005. And some of my very early work was I was tasked with creating virtual environments of real places. So we had customers, when I was at BAE, we had customers that wanted to do various simulation and training applications for very specific parts of the world. The US military was involved in a number of conflicts around this time, and so they frequently wanted to zoom down into those specific locations and say, hey, what would happen if we had to do a training exercise or do an actual engagement in a particular area? And so one of my very early tasks was creating a virtual environment for a tank platoon that was going to be driving through an environment, and they wanted to look at how well the communications worked in that environment. And so I was handed a stack of CDs, and for folks that don't remember what CDs are or weren't around when that was, when those were a thing, this is how software was installed back in that time. And so you'd get a stack of 10 or 12 CDs. And the first stack I got was software capability from a company called Multigen Paradigm that was a 3D virtual visualization capability, and took me about a day and a half to get the entire thing installed from these CDs. But then when you opened it up, there was nothing in the virtual environment. It was just empty space. And so the next step in that process was finding data for these real world places. And at that time, there weren't a lot of resources to be able to go and find that. And so literally I had to go track down an individual at the company who had this giant repository of 3D data in a drawer on additional sets of CDs. And so I had to go in, open up this giant drawer of probably 300 CDs that were there that had all kinds of different source data. So aerial imagery data, elevation data in different data types. And you had to comb through all of that. You had to then, once you found what you wanted, you had to copy it onto a computer. And it was a nightmare to bring all of that data into a single environment, compile it into a single database, and then generate what was then, a digital twin of an environment that that represented the location that they wanted to work in. So much of the work in that workflow was getting the data, putting it onto a system, and correlating it so that if you had imagery and elevation data together, you could have them show up correctly overlaid on one another. And it was a very labor-intensive, hands-on process. And I spent quite a bit of my time in my early career doing that kind of work, creating virtual environments from these variety of sources of data that was captured from the real world, satellite imagery, aircraft imagery. There was a number of satellites that captured this kind of data, and then again, bringing it into a virtual world. So that is simply one example of what at the time was a very hard, time-consuming workflow to get anything done in the 3D environment. World building was very hard, as I just described. Once you got a world created and you wanted to start adding, 3D content to it, vehicles, characters, whatever it happened to be, that was a very labor-intensive process as well in terms of modeling those things, animating them, rigging them, getting them all set up to work. And then frequently what the outcome of those environments once we got them built is they were very barren. You didn't have any detail in the environment. You didn't have a great set of tools that allowed you to take all of that data and enrich it with what might be the types of vegetation that would be in that area, or the types of buildings, or any kinds of detail like that that today you see in virtual worlds and you just expect it to be there. Back then, it was again, a very labor-intensive process to build up that more rich, detailed environment. I have a couple of examples of some of the early work that I worked on. The one on the left here is a virtual environment for a ship simulator. And it took me a while to find this image, but this is some work for a ship simulator that we worked on. As you can tell, pretty rudimentary looking graphics. This is from, again, the early 2000s. But at the time, it was pretty cutting edge in terms of what could be done in a 3D environment, from a terrain modeling perspective, as well as the dynamics of how a ship moves through water and so on. But a very labor-intensive process to build this kind of environment. The image on the left is a component that's on the interior of a submarine. I worked on a program for the U.S. Navy that was a system on board a submarine that they wanted to build a training system for. And the way we built this semi-interactive environment was we had somebody go on board this ship and take thousands of pictures of all of the different equipment down to the interiors of these small boxes that you see here. And then we brought it into Apple QuickTime, which isn't even around anymore. It's an old essentially video viewing capability. But we brought all those pictures in and made it so that you could sort of navigate around what seems sort of like a 3D environment, but it was really just 2D images that we pieced together into a cube that made it seem like you were in a 3D environment. So very rudimentary, but again, at the time, very important to our Navy customer, because they needed to have this training system for their sailors to be able to learn how to use this system before they were actually on the ship. And was one that was actually still in use until somewhat recently, when they've built a more fully 3D immersive environment in the last handful of years. So examples of very basic looking environments, but also very time consuming to build, very complex to build. But again, was sort of the bread and butter of what people were doing in 3D virtual environments at the time. So in my career, where I saw sort of the first big shift happen was the introduction of a technology that took this very labor-intensive process of creating virtual worlds and all of a sudden introduced a very simple way of being able to access that data. And that was the release of Google Earth, which happened right around 2005. It was actually in development for quite a while prior to this, but 2005 was when Google had actually acquired this technology from another company, acquired the company, and did a bunch of work to build out the Google Earth desktop application. And this was, again, if you've never played with this is Google Earth is still around in a web instance, but it used to just be a desktop application. But you could bring up an entire globe, something we take for granted these days, of being able to bring up an entire globe and then zoom down into any part of the world and see quite a bit of detail. Google Earth was really one of the early pioneers in this capability. This was the foundation for what became Google Maps, and was the foundation for a number of other spin-outs that came out of this. If anyone's ever played Pokemon Go, the team that built Google Earth, which was originally called Keyhole, that company Keyhole was acquired by Google. They built Google Earth. They were then looking to figure out what to do next, and they said, "Hey, what if we made a game out of this? This idea that we have the entire world and we can kind of go anywhere with it." They created Pokemon Go, and they created it as really just a proof of concept. They didn't really think they were going to go anywhere with it. But then, as if you've ever played that or know anything about it, it really took off and was a hit, and started opening up people's eyes to what you could do from a geospatial context in terms of playing a game like that in the in the real world as opposed to a made up world for that most games typically had worked in. So yeah, Google Earth was really the start to an evolution of how we simplified the process of creating virtual worlds for specific locations on the planet. So this made it super easy to get this kind of data to anyone's fingertips. And all of a sudden, this shift took place where what was an extremely time-consuming and complex process of creating 3D environments, all of a sudden, people were like, "Hey, this is just easy. I can just go to any part of the world and I can drop into it." And you started seeing a lot of very interesting work come out of that. Some of it built directly on top of Google Earth, but other parts of it, people taking the same concept and being able to say, build out different kinds of capability, but with this sort of underlying foundation of being able to stream data in as a backbone to it. The next really interesting shift that I saw in my career was up until probably around the 2010 timeframe, a lot of software that was used outside of the gaming space. So anybody building 3D environments that weren't games, they weren't building a commercial game. They were building flight simulators, or they were building training applications for the military, or any other kind of sort of virtual environment like that. Up until that point, there were companies that built bespoke software that was specialized for different types of 3D environments. If you wanted a flight simulation tool, you would go down one or two paths from one or two companies. If you wanted to build a communication simulation environment, you would go down a different path. But there wasn't any one tool that could do all of those different things. And right around the 2010 timeframe, people started playing around with the idea of game engines as an easier environment to build in terms of game engines at the time had a lot of the foundational technology that you would need to build, or you would need to customize. It had it out of the box, and so people started saying, "Well, wait, why don't we use game engines to build a flight simulator, or to build a training application, so on and so forth." At the time, that concept got a ton of pushback. There were some people were trying to do it, but a lot of people in the industry, in the higher fidelity simulation, higher fidelity flight dynamics, things that were very specialized, thought game engines are never going to be high fidelity enough. They're never going to have enough of the compute capability to really do not just the visuals, but all of the underlying physics, all of the underlying capabilities that you would need for some of these specialized training applications. Despite that, some of those naysayers, some of the people that pushed back on that, people did continue to do it. And in 2015 or 2013, I worked for a company called IP Keys, and we actually, when we started, we were using a game engine called Gamebryo. Gamebryo, I don't think exists anymore. It was a very early version of a game engine. Other people in the industry were using CryEngine, which was the engine that Crytek, the video game, was built in. And these early examples were again a little bit rough around the edges in terms of full development environments, and certainly some of the environments that I'm sure people on the call here are currently using. But they did provide some good capabilities out of the box. And the company I worked for started with Gamebryo, and then eventually we switched to the Unreal Engine, and we built out this application which is called iGame. And this was a military training application that, when it was first created, was specifically built to train soldiers on how to use counter IED devices. So at the time in the Iraq War, IEDs were a huge problem for the U.S. military. Casualties were happening all the time. Insurgents in those wars were doing very sinister but very creative things in terms of where they hid these devices. how they were used, the kinds of damage they could do. And so the U.S. Army at the time was doing a lot of work trying to figure out, like, how do we counter this? Like, what kinds of devices do we need to create? And they were doing a lot of very rapid prototyping of these technologies. The problem was they didn't have good ways to train soldiers and how to use them as rapidly as they were coming out. And so we devised this idea of, let's build a video game that shows soldiers how to use these devices, and can train them very quickly in a virtual environment. And we saw a lot of power in this. And for me in my career, this was really one of the first times where the use of game engines became prominent from a military training perspective. They wanted to have, the ballistic effects, like how big an explosion, how much damage an explosion would do. They wanted to be able to do all of that in this environment. And so we started collecting that data, that real world data that we had, and plugging it into a video game environment. And it was one of the first times, again, in my career, and there are other instances of this kind of around the same time, where people started going, oh, maybe this is the future. Maybe this is a better way to create these kinds of virtual environments than using these bespoke tools. So it really launched into what you see today. If you fast forward, you see a huge number of people outside of the video game space, not people creating commercial video games, but creating other virtual environments for all kinds of different use cases, starting with game engines as the core capability, as the foundation for what they want to build. And so this was a step in that direction. And today, if you go to, there's a conference that happens right around the corner from UCF called ITSEC that happens every December, which is a showcase of virtual training environments for the U.S. military, or for the world military organizations. And again, if you go back to even just 2019, 2018, almost nobody at that show was using game engines as sort of their core technology. And if you go there today, the vast majority of people are using game engines as their core technology. And this is an interesting shift, because a lot of people had built very robust, very complicated workflows in their bespoke tools. And all of a sudden, game engines simplified that process. And all of a sudden, people were having to learn how to do use these new tools. And it really broke workflows in many cases. And a lot of that initial pushback that was seen in the industries was people that were just stuck in a previous workflow. They had always done it a particular way, and they didn't want to find a different way to do it. A great example of that, again, from my time when I was at Epic Games, we were working with a customer, a large US company that has been in the flight simulation space for a long time. And they were switching their internally built technology. They built their own flight simulation engine from scratch and had been using it for over 2 decades. And they decided to make the switch from that to the Unreal game engine, because they just saw it as a more efficient tool. And it took a very long time to get them to make that switch. And once they made that switch, we had to do a ton of work with them just to make sure they understood what Unreal could do out of the box. And I was working with this one particular engineer whose job it was to build 3D models of airports. He'd been doing this for the better part of 10 or 15 years in his career, and was hand modeling these buildings and all of the details that you have on at an airport, all the runways, all the lighting, all the signage, all these different things that were time consuming for him to do. And one of the time consuming steps he had to do was create levels of detail for all of those models. And so if you aren't familiar with what levels of details are, it's basically as you move away in a 3D environment away from an object, you can have that object have less and less detail, fewer and fewer polygons as you move away, just so that you can efficiently visualize that as you zoom out. So happens in every technology, almost every 3D visualization technology uses levels of detail as a way to efficiently stream large amounts of data like this. This individual was doing those level of detail models by hand. So he would take a really high fidelity 3D model of a building, and then he would create a copy of it and take out some of the details, simplify some of the geometry, delete some of the geometry. And he would do that 5 or 6 or 10 times so that he had this stack of LODs from very, very detailed down to what was essentially just a cube when you got really far away from it. And he was doing all of that work by hand, and I was on this call with him, and he was talking through that, and I was like, well, the Unreal game engine has a button that literally you bring your high fidelity model in, and you push this button, and that button generates all of those levels of detail for you. And he's like, no way, it couldn't possibly do it as well as I can. It's too important to get all the detail right. And he really pushed back. And I was like, all right, I understand. I was like, but maybe just give it a try. Maybe just try it with one model, see what you think. We had a meeting the following week, and he was completely blown away. He was like, you just took a workflow that I've worked on for 10 and 15 years. I'm the guy at this company that knows how to do this. And you just made my job go away in a single day. And I was like, well, hopefully we didn't actually do that. And thankfully we didn't actually do that. His job didn't go away. But it was, again, an early example of me of how these shifts, while they seem great, while introducing video game technology into an industry, has done a ton to enable better, higher fidelity, better visually looking environments. It did break some things in the industry when this shift happened. And so it sort of made me be aware, okay, like as these shifts in technology happen, we really got to think through the impact of them. It certainly happened, with my previous example of building virtual environments. Again, there were people that were specialized in compiling all this data and building databases that could then be real world environments. It happened again with game engine technology for some of the reasons I just explained. And we'll get to in a minute, but AI certainly has, I think, an equal potential to create that level of disruption because of the implications of what it is. So we'll get to that part in just a second. So that was, the second big shift that I saw. And the next big shift that I see is, the introduction of AI. What does this mean for people like this audience who are, learning to build and use 3D technology to build games, to build, experiences, to build applications for, non-game use cases? What does AI mean for that set of for that audience? It certainly is going to be disruptive. It's already being quite disruptive. But I also think it comes with some benefits. And I think there's a balance between what those benefits are and what the potential risks are. We'll step through this. So before I jump into this, I wanted to take, maybe we can just, I don't know if we can just pop in the chat maybe, but I'm curious, how much are people using AI today? Are you using it every day? Do you use it only periodically? Do you not use it at all? And how do people feel about it? I'd love to see some comments in the chats if people want to drop comments in there. Are you excited about it? Are you worried about it? And if anybody has a perspective on how AI feels maybe different than some of the other tech bubbles or advances in technology that have happened in the past, what do you think? How does it feel different? So I'll just drop those questions out there. If you've got thoughts or comments on that, I'd love to see those in the chat. But it's definitely an area that I, all of a sudden in my career, people have been talking about AI for a number of years now. I would say just in the last maybe 2 years, is it all of a sudden at the forefront of almost every conversation that I have at work now. We just had in my current company, we had an all hands meeting where the executive team, the CEO and the CTO, a handful of others, had an all hands meeting for the entire company to specifically talk about the use of AI. And a couple of years ago, those kinds of talks at that level were, hey, let's be cautious, let's be careful, let's not jump into it too, in too detail. Let's be careful about what kind of information you're sharing. To this meeting that just happened 2 weeks ago, the entire conversation was, how are we using it? How can we use it more? What tools do we currently have? What additional tools do we need? It was all about what we need to do to step up our game in using AI to be more efficient and to see the benefits of it. So it was again a bit of an eye-opening conversation for me, just in seeing it not just as something you use on the side to to dabble with, or maybe do a little bit of coding with, but actually people talking about we need to use it in every aspect of our jobs, we need to do everything we can to take advantage of what's coming. So that was an interesting perspective for me. And so, yeah, interesting comment from a few folks on not using it very much. Yeah, some great perspectives there. It's terrible for developers' mental state. I love it. So yeah, keep those coming in. I'm curious to hear what other folks have to say there. But I do want to talk a little bit about potentially some of the benefits from it. I think a lot of what we've all seen from an AI perspective, kind of when it first came on the scene, when ChatGPT first came out, was, okay, I've got an LLM. What can I ask the LLM to do? Can it write an email for me? Can it update my resume for me? There's some things like that it can do, which, I potentially see some benefit in that, although maybe not on a scale where I really feel like it's going to start changing fundamentally how people do work. What I have started to see more recently from other elements of AI are tying something like a large language model into tools that it can interact with, and it can understand from a prompt what you as a user are trying to do, and then interact in some way through some connectivity with a core application to then execute what it is you want to do. So there's tons of examples of these, of people doing this. People are creating agents to do all kinds of different things, read their email, reply to their email. In the world of 3D content creation, of 3D development, of game technology, of virtual worlds, there's some really, really interesting technology coming out where you can do things like block out a scene that you might want to use for a video game or for some sort of virtual environment with literally just three-dimensional shapes, boxes, spheres, very, very simple, primitive 3D content. And then prompt, describe what you want the various pieces to be, and then have the AI generate that. So some very, very interesting workflows. And they're getting better every day. One of the interesting ones that is, and I do see your question about creative agency, Maria, which is a fabulous point, and I'll come back to that one in just a second. One of the interesting technologies I've seen this has been in the news somewhat recently, is the ability to take a single image and create a virtual world from it. You take an image of a building and then you can walk around the building and see it. And while there is certainly an implication of the creative aspect of that, when you think about some of the potential use cases for that, I think some of these efficiencies allow AI to remove some of the grunt work involved in content creation, so that, to your question, Maria, you can get to the creative aspect of what you're building more quickly. One of the things that I think AI isn't very good at is, putting, creative storytelling or artistic applications to an environment. So if you wanted to create something very stylized or tell a very unique story, AI is not very good at that. But if you've got a good story and you want some help creating the virtual environment within which that story will take place, AI can be great at that, or at least be helpful in getting to a starting point with that. So I think there's definitely a balance. I do think we're very far away from AI being able to completely do away with people like yourselves, people like myself that are in the business of creating virtual environments for all kinds of different use cases. I do think AI can be useful in removing some of that grunt work and getting through a creative process more quickly, so that you can get to your end product more quickly. Another great example I'll give here, I don't know if in the work that you all are doing, you do much storyboarding where you're creating, just drawn images of your concept for a game, for kind of experience you're working on creating. It's a great process to go through to kind of get through with a team, like, what are your ideas, what kinds of ideas do people have, what kind of creative input do people have, I saw a great example recently of a team doing that creative process, talking through the development of what they wanted to build, but using AI to generate essentially storyboards of what their environment was going to be. So it was still their ideas, but they could put to paper very quickly some storyboards that they can then communicate with a larger audience. So certainly lots of debate around, you know, where this will fit in, but I think it will potentially have its place. And I want to talk next about a very specific use case or example of sort of this mind shift that's happening. And this is a mind shift that happened at Epic Games. And so I was at Epic Games starting in 2001. And right around the same time, things like AI were relatively new, were starting to be used, and relatively early in that, the advent of things like ChatGPT is the image generation capability came around. Midjourney and other tools that could create images from a prompt started happening. And at that time, Epic came out and took a very, very public and very specific stance saying, we do not allow people internal to Epic Games to use AI to generate content. And in all of the platforms that they have for sharing 3D content and things like ArtStation and what is now called Fab, which was their 3D marketplace. They banned the use of AI, and so anybody that was putting content up there that was AI generated, it either got kicked out or labeled specifically as AI generated. So there was a very strict policy on that. And that included also using AI in things like code generation. Epic had a very strict stance that said, absolutely not. You can use it to, write an email. You can use it to, proofread a paper or things like that, but you can't use it in code generation. You can't use it to create 3D content. And for my entire tenure at Epic Games, that was the stance. You weren't allowed to use it. They didn't have any internal AI tools from like an instance of ChatGPT or something like that you could use, or Claude or anything like that you could use. And so that was the stance. Fast forward to about a year ago, and Epic Games basically came out and completely changed their stance on it and said, and this is me paraphrasing a bit in terms of what they said, but they basically came out and said, AI is a game changer when it comes to the speed and efficiency with which you can create and the benefits it brings to augmenting a person's capability. They made a very specific statement that they do not see AI as replacing anybody in their organization. We can talk about the 1,000 people they just laid off. They are adamant that was not a layoff that had anything to do with AI, which I believe generally, but they did just have a giant layoff. But they did see this shift that they saw was that there are benefits to using it. There are efficiencies that can be gained for a software developer to, again, take some of that grunt work of writing tests for your code, how efficient your code is. AI is pretty well suited to help with some of those questions. And so they started to recognize that. And they've made this shift where now they do use and encourage the use of AI tools. They still don't want to really use it for code generation, but they do allow it to be used for, again, helping with coding projects and things along those lines. But they've really made it part of their core capability. And another great example of how Epic is using it, which is an interesting story of how it can be very efficient. One of the big challenges Epic has as a relatively small company, but very small compared to their customer base. They have a huge number of customers that are using Unreal. And a real internal challenge that they have is servicing those customers, answering their questions, doing tech support, helping people, with kind of all elements of the engine. And they spent years trying to tweak their internal tools that are available so that they can help as many people as possible. But at the end of the day, there's just a ton of people using Unreal, and so it's a big challenge of theirs. They've hired giant teams of people that can do forum support, answering people's questions, so on and so forth. It's always been a big challenge. It's always been something they've been very focused on because they want to make sure that their customers are getting the attention they need so that they can be successful using Unreal. What they've introduced recently is they said, well, what if we've got a ton of knowledge, a ton of documentation, a ton of tutorials, a ton of internal information around all of our tools and all the capabilities, all the things people can do with it. What if we trained an AI just on that data, not on all the data that's out there about Unreal? You can go Google anything about Unreal and you'll get 1,000 different perspectives on how to do something in the engine. But they said, what if we just focus on what we have internally, which we think are best practices in using Unreal? What if we trained an AI just on that content and then allowed people to come in and ask the AI questions about, hey, what's the best way to generate a 3D scene with lots of trees and some people moving around in it, and have AI create some answers from that? And that's been something they introduced probably just over a year ago that they've seen huge success with and had great responses from, because it does a great job of sort of removing the grunt work. And in that case, the grunt work is all that information exists. It's not like it's not available to users, but finding the right key information, the specific information. And for anyone that's ever used Unreal, there's all kinds of workflows within the engine that are extremely complicated to learn and to understand how to use. This is a really great way of saying, hey, I don't care about all the specifics of movie render queue or rigging a character, but what I want to do is X, Y, and Z. Let me just tell me exactly those steps. And this AI is very well adapted to be able to answer those very specific questions. So an interesting use case. Again, removing some of that grunt work, both for people using the engine, but also for people at Epic that are trying to do the best they can to support and service customers that are using the engine. So that was an interesting use case. I'm sure people have seen all kinds of very cool things that Epic is doing. This is a tool called MetaHuman Creator. This came out in about 2001, I think, and this was again another really big shift in 3D content creation, where creating and animating 3D characters has always been an extremely complex, complicated workflow. A very specific types of developers and animators and 3D content creators have this skill set. It's a very small batch, and so when you want to get sort of this level of quality from a 3D human, you needed a large development team and a lot of time and money to create these custom characters. MetaHuman Creator came out and basically democratized that, made it so that anybody that wanted to add really high fidelity 3D characters to their game, to their experience, whatever it happens to be, could do it in a super simple, super straightforward way. And they have all of these tools now that anybody can go and create it. So again, you could look at this in a couple different ways. One, it's an amazing set of capabilities that now anybody can add sort of this level of fidelity of human characters to their experience, to their game, whatever it happens to be. Other people might think, hey, this is capability that I specialize in. It's something that I have spent my career learning how to do. All of this kind of sculpting of a human figure and making it look super realistic. And so there's a balance there. I think on the one side, that person might be upset that maybe their work is done. They might also see it as a way of being much more super efficient in what they can create. One of the really nice things about MetaHuman Creator is while it gives you all of these tools, you still have access to all of the underlying rigging, the mesh, all of what you need from a character. So if you do want to go and do more customization, maybe you don't want this to look like a human, you want it to look like some alien or something like that, you still have the ability to go and do all of that kind of work. But this significantly simplifies what it means to kind of create these kinds of super realistic characters and the work that it takes to get them to perform performantly in your environment. So those are just a couple of examples, I think, of some interesting work Epic is doing. This is another one where, again, I'm going back to that early example of like creating a virtual environment. The ability to create, a lot of the work I've done again is focused on real world environments. So you could imagine having data about some part of the world that has some mountains in it, like you see in this image. But again, once you had that, actually creating trees and ground cover that looks super realistic was always a really challenging thing to do, and a very time consuming thing to do. Epic introduced a few years ago a capability called procedural content generation, PCG. And this is the idea where you can take something simple like this little set of shrubbery over here, which is just a handful of 3D models of trees, and then you can apply some details to it in terms of how these change or shift or scale based on where they are in an environment. So what you're seeing in this video is somebody taking that, they've applied these rules to it, and those rules, as they expand the area, where the set of trees goes, all of that content is generated on the fly. So you might spend a whole bunch of time building this little section of trees to make them look as super realistic as possible. But then if you want to go populate an entire area with them, you might want to have some tools that can help do that in a more rapid way. So again, a shift in what can I create? How quickly can I create it? What tools do I need to know? And I like this example because I think it is an example that I think AI also fits into, where for me as somebody that's worked in 3D environments quite a bit, I don't know anything about modeling 3D vegetation or like actually building these out. Maria, you would be the expert here. But if I didn't want to go in and carve a path through this environment or change things around, it's a lot of manual work to be done. But as you can see here with the PCG capability, a lot of that is handled by these systems so that you can do it much more rapidly. They still take quite a bit of work to set up and configure. So the rule sets that you create for what that path, how that path interacts with the trees in this environment are still things that you have to define. But you can imagine on a team, you have one person doing sort of this initial creation of these rules, these rule sets, these content packs, and then handing it over to a creative team to say, okay, we want to have a forest environment that's got a river running through it because we're going to build a game that can go do all of that kind of stuff. Now the creative team can step in and go, okay, here's what we want this to look like. Here's how we want that river to flow through this tree canopy. And they can much more rapidly create these environments, customize these environments without having to rely back on the technical team to get all of this down to to create this environment before they can go in and build gameplay elements on top of it. So is this a bad thing? Is this does this take away some of the creative agency that typically comes with building an environment like this? I think you could argue that maybe it does, but I think you could also argue that maybe it also frees up a team of people building something creative to more rapidly create something that is exactly what they want versus being stuck with just the tools that they know. So that's where I see the power of this kind of capability. I think AI is the same way. I think it enables teams to do things more efficiently. I think it enables teams to more quickly bring their ideas to life. And I think it's something that, like it or not, I think it's something that's going to be more and more part of what we all do on a regular basis. If you're working in any environment, I think as it relates to 3D building, I think you're going to see more and more capability like this coming to bear, being developed. And I think you could fight it. You could say that you'd rather that not be the case. But I think if you think about what it enables you to do, what it gives you the power to do, I think you'll realize that there's quite a bit of benefit from it. So, and this is I think summarizes this quite well. And this is a sentiment that was originally shared by a gentleman back in 2023 as people started to get scared about AI taking their jobs. And there is definitely a concern about what AI means for job creation and people maintaining their jobs. I think where we are today, I think this statement sort of sums it up in that I don't think AI is going to start taking your job. I think what you all are learning, in this program at UCF, is going to be invaluable. I think AI is not going to take your job, but I think a person using AI to do your job more efficiently or to do the task at hand more efficiently is potentially going to take jobs. I think that's going to be something that we start to see, that people that are embracing it, that are using it to just be more efficient, are going to be people that companies are looking at. And I think I can say with some level of confidence that companies today are paying attention to this. You're going to get out of school, start looking for jobs. I guarantee you that these kinds of questions are going to come up of how do you use AI? Where do you see its benefits? And like it or not, I think people that aren't using it at all are going to be seen one way versus people that are saying, hey, look, I can be more efficient in what I do by using AI to help me do my work. So I think that is a reality that, if not already here, I think it's coming. And I think it'll be something that you see in your early careers as you get out of school, and seeing, what people are looking for. So I realize we're getting close on time. I do have additional time at the end here if we want to open it up for questions, but just the last couple of closing points here. I think an important part of this, again, to understand, like just to reiterate, is that AI, I like this quote too, is the brush, it's not the artist. We need people that are creative. We need people that understand how to create engaging, immersive content and experiences and games and environments. And AI is not going to be able to do that on its own. And I think, you can think of it as, one way I've heard people describe it is, think of AI as sort of a junior coworker, somebody that you now have on your team that you can give tasks to that you would have otherwise had to do yourself. And there's things that you don't want to do. It's things that are time consuming and repetitive. AI is great for that. And that frees you up to do, more interesting, more creative things. And I think that's an interesting way of thinking about how this is going to go. So yeah, final points. Embrace efficiency. If a tool makes you 10 times faster, start using it. This is a great one. And as I was thinking through this, I think this is a really important thing to understand. Software that you're using today is going to be obsolete in a really short period of time. People are using AI to reinvent how content creation is done. And it might still be Unreal Engine or Unity that you're using, but the capabilities within it are going to be drastically changed by what AI can do out of the box, even if it's just something like that PCG example I was just showing. And AI does provide the grunt work, but it is still going to take humans to do the why part, to make something engaging, to make something have heart or creativity or style. You've seen in some of my AI generated artwork for these slides, it's usually pretty terrible. And so again, I think that's where, artistic agency is never going to go away. I don't think AI is ever going to be able to replace that, but let it replace the grunt work. Let it do that part for you. So I will pause there. I really appreciate the time here. The QR code will take you to my LinkedIn page if you wanted to connect or ask additional questions. But again, Maria, I'm happy to take some questions if we do have the time here.
Yeah, we have time. No worries. I think this
Great.
was wonderful. Thank you so much. We're really so grateful, Danny. Excellent presentation, wonderful points. There are a bunch of questions here. I think Maddie had one. She sees students are setting AI rules in team contracts. It's a great point for discussion and debate. I think that that's where, do you have any advice for helping students find the middle ground, either banning
I,
it or leaning too much on it? So what's
yeah,
the
I think it's a great suggestion to set rules to from my experience for a long time, the use of AI, even for like writing an email or writing a document, was always sort of frowned upon, and people never talked about doing it. Um, a lot of people were doing it despite that. And the shift that I've seen in the last year, maybe 18 months, is that people are very specifically saying what they're doing with it. Here's how I'm using it here, and discussing it as a team. Here's how we think we should employ it as a team. So I think setting those rules, and also from your own messaging in terms of what you want to be able to tell the world you're doing. I think saying, hey, like, yeah, we use AI, but here's how we use it. And we don't want to, to all of the questions around, creative agency and the important roles that, that, that people play in creating great, immersive content. I think saying things like, hey, I use it for, creating some dialogue with some of my characters, but we don't use it for any of our artwork, or whatever those rules are. I think specifically stating that, I think, is a really important thing to do. And I think something that you're going to see more and more.
excellent? It's more of the design focused, intentional and deliberate process of thinking very carefully about what you're doing, why you're doing it, who you're working to create a solution for, and
Exactly. Exactly.
really, really kind of own that design process and being super aware of what you're bringing into this world, right? We have this power to create and to bring technological systems into the world that have massive impacts on society and humanity, economies, political systems. I mean, Facebook, right? Big example of unintended consequences
Right.
of allowing, people to get profiled for advertisers. I mean, that's the model, right? It's not
Right.
really about connecting or sharing or learning. It's really the profit motive that's driving um, the design, right? So we could be very intentional about the design outcomes. What are we designing for this tool to produce? And then make it happen. And that's
Yeah.
a really important exercise and responsibility of the creative class, I think, who are technically savvy and knowledgeable. That's excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely agree. I think that's really important.
Are there any other questions here for Danny today?
Yeah. It looks like we've got a hand up. Madeline?
Go ahead, Maddie.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up also, I've noticed with my students kind of building on that contracts when they have debates, I'm still struggling with a high number of students that are very, very much against it. Some of these contracts, like when they're doing that, it's kind of like a way that they can say, like, okay, like your role is this is what you do, and that's part of those contracts. But when they get to that AI part, there's some people that are, I mean, very, very, it's black and white.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to help them navigate like a middle ground while also kind of saying like a lot of what you said in your talk, like, hey, it's here. I just wanted to see if you had any advice for, and I've talked with some coworkers before, like how we can help maybe ease some of that very black and white thinking from the students that are very, very much against it.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think, yeah. And I know it's interesting. I do think there is absolutely, you know, um, some opinion that it's wrong, it's bad for the environment. There's a huge energy, cost associated with it, all of which are valid questions and concerns. It has impact on the creative agency for it. Um, Again, from just a purely pragmatic standpoint, I think when you look at the amount of time, money, investment going into the development of AI and the spread of AI, um, I think it's a little naive to think you that it doesn't have some place. So I would encourage people to, and again, I think like this idea of setting the rules or creating a contract, understand that in industry today, the people that are succeeding are using it, and they're being very deliberate in how they want to use it. And I think if you do have fundamental disagreements with wanting to use it, I would encourage people to do some research, because there is a lot of implication in terms of the environmental impact, but there's also a lot of people trying to solve that problem, trying to figure out how to do it more efficiently. There are AI tools out there that tout themselves as being much more energy efficient, because they can do the same thing that a chat GPT can, but just running on your local machine, as opposed to having to have a huge data center to do it. So and as you start to explore and understand the full breadth of what's out there, I think you'll find that while you might have some objections to how it goes, there are places for it, and there are the right kinds of AI tools that you can start using. I absolutely don't suggest that something like ChatGPT or Gemini are like the only things you should use. They have potentially a place to simplify some things, but there are some great tools out there that are, OpenClaw is a great example. There's a number of tools out there that exist that are very, very purpose-built, with an eye towards being more energy efficient, more environmentally friendly, but have a much more specialized use case. And so I would encourage people to, if you the idea of using ChatGPT or some of these others that are big, that are just trying to do as much AI as fast as possible, if that turns you off, I get it, and I don't argue with that. But I would encourage people to go explore what else is out there from an AI perspective. Like pick a small corner of something that you're doing, that you're studying, or that you're trying to build, and see what exists from a specialized tool standpoint from an AI perspective that could help you with that, because there's a lot of that kind of capability out there. If people don't know what Hugging Face is, go check it out. It's a web repository for all these different AI tools and models that exist, and you can find lots of information there. So that would be my thing. I would say I would encourage people to do their research, to look into it, to figure out where it can be beneficial to the workflows you're working on.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great question. I love the recommendation to use AI for the purpose of learning applications, like hitting the technical documentation, because you have natural language interface, you have a repository of documents that are vectors and a RAG, a type of AI. It's a power search tool. And so it's hitting a database essentially of verified, authenticated, ground truth knowledge, right?
Yeah.
The hallucinations will be less, right, with the natural language LLM.
Absolutely.
And I think that training set is critical. I also really enjoyed your demonstration of the metahumans. They're really fabulous. I'm wondering if the metahumans have the ability to automatically broadcast in applications that they're fake and not real, given the deep fake problems that we're seeing, in the world. Of misinformation. So if the design of the tool of MetaHuman was intentionally created to automatically say, hey, I'm fake, I'm not the real actor, is that possible, Danny? Do you know?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to it. I do know that.
That's okay. I do know that be a professor on you, but
Yeah, no. It's a great question. I do know that Epic has been very cautious in they have a deep understanding and appreciation for exactly what you're talking about. That metahumans and any photorealistic content can be used in a way that might not be desired, and so they talk about that a lot. And there are just in the terms of service of using MetaHuman, or just their tools in general, there's clauses in there that specifically state what you can and can't use it for. Does that prevent people from going and doing the kinds of things that you're talking about? Certainly not, but Um, uh, but yeah, I mean, they're certainly mindful of it.
Sure.
One of the other pieces I just wanted to mention, from an AI standpoint, again, I think large language models have gotten, a lot of people have a negative, connotation around them just because they can hallucinate, because they can get things wrong. There's a ton of work going into, exactly what we were just talking about, like what Epic has done in terms of putting all of their training material, training a model on their training material. But just the general concept of MCP, model context protocol,
I'm sorry, what was that, Danny?
model context protocol, MCP.
Oh, okay.
This is a open protocol or an open standard that Anthropic created, with the intent of giving a large language model access to specialized information. And that can be something as simple as, a repository of documentation, like the Epic Games example, but it can be all kinds of different things. And in fact, I know we're over time, but I'm going to show
No, it's okay. Really, this is really wonderful. Keep
I'll
going.
show this as a quick example. So my company, this is just a super simple. This is a JavaScript library called Cesium.js. This is an open source piece of software that we put out for being able to visualize the globe. Nothing special here, but this is in an environment where I can go and create, write JavaScript code to customize, what this application does. And this is just a little sandbox that we have up on our website that people can go just kind of play around with it. But one of the things we just introduced to it, is the ability to interact with this 3D model from a large language model perspective. So Maria, you asked the question right when we started about being able to visualize conservation areas around the globe. And so
Oh, yeah.
I went in and, using a large language model, I just put in that said, create a set of waypoints that highlight conservation areas around the world, then fly through each one, briefly pausing and panning the camera, and then add some buttons for starting and stopping it. And then, yeah, so that's what I just typed that in. The large language model went and did all of that work and then wrote all of this JavaScript code to then do that. And so, in the 10 minutes right when we were starting, I created this little app that says, okay, we're going to fly to the Galapagos Islands. And granted, this isn't perfect by any means.
Wait a second. You just did this while you were talking? Like,
right before we started, I typed in that
crazy.
prompt, and in like 5 minutes, the large language model had that, like all of the buttons on here, being able to pause it, being able to start it, all of that was generated by AI. So, and again, this is an example where on the back end, we've created this model context protocol that tells the large language model, like, here's what you can do with this Cesium.js tool. Here are the JavaScript libraries in terms of how you create a waypoint or how you put UI elements on the screen. So it has all of that as sort of specialized information. Then it can go create these kinds of things on the fly. I did another one. I did this before we started today, but again, this took 5 minutes. I said, hey, zoom into the UCF campus, like pick a couple of waypoints, label some areas, pan around. Again, not in any way perfect, but just a quick way to, create these kinds of things. And so, this is where I think large language models by themselves have all kinds of concerns, but when you start finding the specialized tools and being able to tie it into data and information that you care about, all of a sudden you get some pretty interesting, more robust capabilities. So, yeah, just an example of the kind of thing that we're talking about.
Really fantastic evidence of speed of execution, automation. And I do think that AI hitting a code base, which is open source, that's ethical, legal, right? So the
Yeah.
LLM as a way for programmers to power up application design and development, just like you demonstrated, I think is a really good use case, really positive, because there's no moral dilemma here. There's no legal dilemma because the code base was open source. The AI was trained on that code source, and the natural language interface is more efficient than typing, right? Much faster and more intuitive. So that's brilliant. And I do have like a billion questions.
Yeah.
Are you hitting the Google KML semantic markup language in order to make this happen? I mean,
And
what's
this,
underneath Cesium? I want you to open up the hood.
yeah, we by default, no, we are not using KML. We have the ability to read in KML data if I wanted to, but Cesium. So I didn't talk much about what my company does. We have a capability that is the geospatial server side of an application like this. It streams all of this data from a server into an application, and that application can be anything that can read in the format that we stream out, which is an open standard format that we created.
Okay. So
So
it's
you
a
could take,
Cesium format.
correct. It's
Okay.
called 3D tiles.
Okay.
It is a format we created, but it is an open standard. So anybody can build an interface to it. There's nothing proprietary about it. So we built, so the commercial software that we sell is that server that takes any sort of 3D data and converts it into 3D tiles, and then it can live in the cloud and be streamed out to an application like we're viewing here. What we did in addition to that is we created 4 free and open source client applications. One is the one that you're seeing right now. This is Cesium JS. It's a JavaScript application that does all of this rendering under the hood, all of the camera controls, all of the things like waypoints, being able to everything that I told it to do. It went and created JavaScript that accesses the Cesium library to say, hey, I want to zoom to a particular area. So here's a Cesium JS call that says here's a latitude and longitude that I want you to fly to. Here's camera controls that are part of the Cesium library that says, hey, I want you to once you get to that area, I want you to look at it in a particular direction and orientation. So all of that's built into the Cesium JS application. Anybody can go use this library. It's up on GitHub. You can use it and customize it for free. We also have a plugin that's free and open source for the Unreal game engine, for the Unity game engine, and for Omniverse, which is the NVIDIA environment.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if you're working on projects, and part of where we went down this path with game engines was that while game engines can do a lot, game engines, for the most part, don't support geographic coordinates, and so our plugin it does all of that math to be able to like render around Earth, but then understand what lat long is, and you can navigate via those kinds of coordinate projections versus the game space projections that are what they use out of the box.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So quickly compare and contrast what Cesium is and what Google Earth is and how they're different.
Yeah, great question. So Cesium is more, the majority of our customers, well, let me start with Google Earth. Google Earth is a desktop or a web application that you can go in and you can create waypoints, you can create fly-throughs, you can do all of this kind of stuff. But you can't develop on top of it, right? You can't build, or at least not easily, can you build applications on top of it. So if you wanted to create a digital twin of the UCF campus and add in not just your 3D models of buildings in the area, but also add in
my plants, all my plants,
all your plants, cars and students walking around and driving around.
Right.
That's where you need an engine that has the ability to do that kind of thing. And Google Earth doesn't do that.
No.
Google Earth is great at visualizing. It's got a great library of 3D content for the globe. But if you want to build custom capability on top of it, or add a bunch of your 3D plant models to it, it doesn't really provide an efficient way of doing that. Cesium does. Cesium, in combination with things like this JavaScript library or with Unreal, gives you something where you can truly build an interactive environment. And Maria, your virtual reality walkthrough of is it the Arboretum there at UCF?
Yes.
Yeah. So you built that in Unreal, and that's because you wanted it to be in VR. You wanted it to be interactive. Those are things that you couldn't do with Google Earth. Cesium adds capability to that by saying, like, you could add all the arboretums in the United States and, populate it with 3D content for those areas and customize that however you want.
And
So
then
it's a
what I
development platform. It's a foundational layer for people to build on top of.
and then instead of creating an EXE, it would be hosted at Cesium, and there would be a software as a service model, or what?
Either way, so
That would,
so if you were working in Unreal, for example, you could create an EXE, and there's ways that you can clip, like if you had only a small area, if you just wanted the UCF campus, for example, there are ways where you could clip just that out and have it all just reside locally with that EXE, and you could do it that way. Or you could connect to the service and you can say, it's still an EXE, but in real time, I'm going to connect to what I have up in the cloud. One of the benefits of doing that is it allows you to update that data.
right,
You can update that data without having to update your EXE. You can
right.
have, refresh the content in your, geospatial environment, and then have all of that show up in your application.
Well, this was amazing, Danny. I don't want to take more of your time. We could follow up. Students could follow up afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think that this was really an incredible gift of your time and your knowledge and your expertise, and we're so grateful. Lots of questions, I'm sure, and we thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Maria. I really enjoyed it, and please do reach out. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I can drop my email in the chat here, and yeah, if people have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Wonderful. Just so engaging.
Excellent.
All right. Well,
Thank you
you
so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.